That's right. The only person standing between Franklin Roosevelt and the realization of his dream of creating a presidential library is his mother. Now, there have been some very good books written about the presidential wives. Feather Foster and others have written some wonderful scholarship on that subject. Somebody needs to write about the presidential mothers, though, because that's a pretty interesting side story on its own. George Washington's mother was a very difficult woman, never known to say anything positive about her son. Uh, Even went to Congress while Washington was fighting the Revolutionary War and told Congress that her son was not giving her enough money to live on and that she needed to be given some money from the Congress to live on. Humiliating to George Washington. And she used to pull shenanigans like that quite often. Maybe I'll talk about Harry Truman's mother-in-law when we discuss the Truman Library. She was one of a kind. But Franklin Roosevelt's mother was a very difficult woman to a lot of people, very strong-willed woman. She loved her son very much, was absolutely devoted to him. Nonetheless, she was a very strong-willed woman. The house that Franklin Roosevelt grew up in and still lived in when he wasn't in the White House or in the governor's mansion was her house. Eleanor never was able to feel at home in that place, which is why eventually Franklin built her a cottage where she could go and be comfortable. So Franklin Roosevelt is probably the most powerful president in the 20th century. When he becomes president, people are really talking about the possibility that he should have a benign dictatorship. That seems like something that maybe we need to do because the economy is so terrible, because what's going on in Italy, what's going on in Germany. There's a number of serious commentators who want to suspend the Constitution and really give Franklin Roosevelt dictatorial powers. He's not going to become dictator, but with that threat hovering in the distance, he's able to do more in his first 100 days than any other president has ever been able to do. He's really able to get done what he wants to do for a while. And he's, as I say, the most powerful president of his period of time. Nonetheless, he still gets an allowance from his mother. And his house is still owned by his mother. Now, part of this deal for the library is that he's going to give them his childhood home. That's going to become government property, and people are going to be able to visit it when they come to the Franklin Roosevelt Presidential Library. So there's a big ceremony set up for him to sign over the property. And guess what? He never asked his mother. She doesn't like this idea. She does not like the idea of people wandering around so close to her house. The library is very close to the house. She doesn't like any of this, and he never asked her. So we get up to the date where the ceremony is going to take place. He's going to sign over the property, and guess what? Mother's gone. She's on a yacht to Europe. She takes off. And suddenly people realize, oh my gosh, we're supposed to have this ceremony. Franklin Roosevelt's supposed to sign over the property. Well, he can't. He only has a life interest. He can't sign the property over. He needs his mother's signature. Nobody can reach his mother. So there's some very amusing documents in the Roosevelt Library discussing Roosevelt and an attorney who's there, and everybody's trying to figure out what the heck are we going to do. Well, eventually they come up with a plan. Roosevelt doesn't really sign over the property. They go in front of the cameras. He stands there with a pen and he pretends to sign the document, but he can't because it's not his property. Nonetheless, they go through this sort of fraudulent exercise and move on. What he does after that is he sends a telegram to his mother, which I believe they had to get a helicopter and go to the yacht and give it to her. And he writes it as if it's just this chatty little letter. And then he says, by the way, we had this ceremony, and I need you to sign these papers and return them to me. Well, Roosevelt knew how to handle his mother. I mean, she's not going to humiliate her son. And what he's letting her know with that letter is, listen, I put myself over the line here. I signed this thing. I need you to sign. I need you to sign over the property so that this is going to go through. And she does it. So Franklin Roosevelt is able to get his dream realized. Now, another fascinating thing in the Roosevelt Library is to see how much involvement Franklin Roosevelt had with his own library. He drew a sketch, and you can look at it over there. He drew a sketch which is pretty much exactly how the library is. He looked over everything. He said what types of trees he wanted in which spots. He looked at a place to decide where there should be a little booth to take tickets. Then decided that the people who offered to build the booth, they all quoted too much money, so he didn't want the booth. He looked at who the people would be, who would be in the booths, who would take the tickets. He had his hand in every step of this. So when you go to the Franklin Roosevelt Library, you're able to see the library exactly the way Franklin Roosevelt envisioned it. You also get to see the house he grew up in, and it's very interesting because when I went to the house, we're going through the tour, and people kept saying, did it look like this when Roosevelt was here? Because it looks like a museum. And the tour guide would say, yeah, isn't that interesting? See, Franklin Roosevelt always envisioned himself as president, and he always envisioned the house he grew up in as a museum one day, and that's how it ended up.